Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to our webinar today, which is entitled Implementing Teaching to the Northeast. We're really excited to be able to bring this to you as our contribution to the Equity in Education conference in 2022. No ōpōtiki, no whāngarei, no tamaki makaurau, me kirikiri aho, ko Jenna Crowley-Snalem tōku ingoa. I work for Cognition Education. I'm the Taitokoro Regional Manager for our team of consultants in the PLD space, and also the National Manager for our Relationships First program, which is Cognition's answer to effective practice in culturally responsive pedagogy. I'm going to hand over today for my colleagues to introduce themselves. So we have Rosina Wikaira and Russell Bishop with us.
Kia ora tātou katoa, matapaurua te waka kupe te kaihau tū, te ramaroa te maunga, whirinaki te awa me te whenua, mātai aranui te marae, te hikatū, te hapu, ngā pui te iwi, Rosina o Rohina Wikaira aho. No te kaiwhakahaere o Tamaki Makaurau, the Regional Manager with Cognition Education in Auckland. Kia ora. Russell.
Kia ora Rosina, tēnā koe, kia ora Jenna. Tēnā koutou i te whānau, hui hui mai nei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Ko Waikato te awa, hotorua te tangata. Tainui te waka, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou tātou. Pai rawa kiti a koutou e wainga tātou. E tēnei wā. E kōrua, tēnā kōrua mō o kōrua manakitanga ki a hau. Ia koutou mā, ngā kai whakawā, tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here with you and just share the slides that we have for this webinar with you today. Okay, so today's webinar, we're going to hear from Russell about his research and what led to his latest book, Teaching to the Northeast. And we're really privileged to have Rosina with us today to talk about how she implemented this work in practice at her previous school as tumuaki at Homai School in Manurewa. And we've also built into the webinar the opportunity for you to reflect on your own discourse and how you may be able to implement this work into practice within your context. So just to begin with, I'm going to hand over to Russell to tell us a little bit about his research and his mahi and how we got to where we are now with Cognition and the Relationships First program. Kia koe, Russell.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe, Jenna. Kia ora tātou. The program that you're looking at now, Relationships First, is based upon a lot of research that I've been party to with a whole bunch of other people, of course, in the past and also in the present. And you'll see evidence of that today. Teaching to the Northeast is a culmination of all that work, and it really builds upon the work that I did a number of years ago now in the Te Kotahitanga program. And one of the major outcomes of Te Kotahitanga was the test of the idea that relationships were fundamental to teachers being able to do their job effectively for Māori and by extrapolation for other marginalised students. The testing of this was done by gathering of a large-scale database, which we were able to show that there was a relationship, a correlation between those teachers who were able to implement caring and learning relationships in their classroom most effectively and their ability to use those pedagogic interactions that we know make a difference for students' learning. However, that was a very, very sound outcome from Te Kotahitanga, and it showed that it was predicated, that improving its students' achievement was actually predicated upon teachers' ability to improve the way that they developed caring and learning relationships with their students. However, there remained at the end of Te Kotaitanga the major issue of sustainability at classroom and school levels. And also there was another major issue, and that is that most of the teachers that we observed in Te Kotaitanga moved into, they changed the way they related to Māori students, but they didn't follow through and change the way that they interacted with Māori students, and that is using pedagogies that we know make a difference for learning. So it was important to add a third major part to this, what had been there, a dual perception, that is relationships and interactions. So it was necessary to add a third part where teachers and school leaders monitor the impact of their activities and the processes of learning on student outcomes and modify their relationships and interactions accordingly. So where teachers do this, that is, they modify the relationships and the interactions that they have as a result of the monitoring of the outcomes that students undertake and demonstrate, and also the way that the processes of learning, these relationships and the interactions, the feedback, the feed forward, the co-construction, the use of prior learning, all those sorts of teaching practices that we know make a difference for student learning. When you modify these practices, this appears to be the case to move teachers into what is called the Northeast. And I'll move on to the next slide later that will actually illustrate what I mean by the Northeast. Kia ora.
Thanks very much, Russell. We're really privileged at Cognition to have been able to continue to work with Russell since the end of the Te Kotaitanga project, and to continue to develop the work through a process of ongoing research and development and implementation across a huge number of schools now, both nationally in New Zealand and also overseas in Canada and in Australia in the Northern Territory. So what we now know as the Relationships First program is a PLD program that supports schools from primary schools right up to secondary and tertiary contexts to implement the theory and put it into practice within their context. So we have a great team of consultants and facilitators who come out and support you to grow internal capability in the implementation of the work and the scaling up of the practice within your own context. I'm going to hand back to Russell to talk about what we actually mean when we talk about teaching to the Northeast and where that came from.
This is a slide of this shows the just before that, the base slide here without the crosshatch on it shows the relationship between, or the correlation between a relational scale on the horizontal axis and the use of what's called discursive or interactive pedagogies on the vertical axis. And what all these dots show is actually a scatter plot of some 3,000 odd teachers over a range of subjects and a range of times during the year, times during the day, the different sorts of curriculum areas, and so on and so forth. The correlation between the two is, the chances of it happening by chance are very slim. What it shows is that there is a correlation between relationships and teaching skills. There is a 0.4 relationship between the horizontal scale and the vertical scale. And that, in other words, as teachers get better implementing a relationship practices in their classroom, that is demonstrating that they care for young people's learning as culturally located people, knowing how to teach, knowing what to teach, demonstrating they have high expectations for young people, and also moving away from using deficit explanations for young people's difficulties with learning or problems with learning towards more agentic approaches. And these will be clarified a bit further. The vertical scale shows that as people get better at relationships, they also get better at using those teaching skills we know make a difference for student learning. What's really interesting about this, as well as it showing the relationship, is that the upper left-hand quadrant of the scale of the scatter plot shows that there is nobody, or very few, there's a couple of examples in that area, which shows that those people who have low levels of relational experiences in their classroom do not use, and we would suggest cannot use, those pedagogies we know make a difference for student learning. This shows that the implementation and the development of caring and learning relationships is in fact fundamental to teachers being able to use those skills that we know make a difference for student learning. We then tested this with by talking with young Māori students again following the first round of implementation of Te Koteitanga, and they told us about 4 types of teachers. Those in the bottom left-hand corner, or the southwest, are the teachers who have low levels of relationships and low teaching skills. They didn't learn in those classrooms. The upper left-hand quadrant, that is the northwest, they are talking there about teachers who have low levels of relationships but high teaching skills. They said they don't learn in those classrooms either, because the teachers there just teach. They don't care if they're there or not. In the bottom right-hand quadrant, you've got a tremendous number of teachers there, but these are the teachers that have got high relationship skills but low teaching skills. And unfortunately, Māori students told us they don't learn in those rooms either. The only rooms that they learn in are those teachers that have got high levels of relationship skills and high teaching skills. And that is the Northeast. And that's what I was talking about before when I was saying what this graph shows us, that in Te Koteitanga, large numbers of teachers felt that high relationships with low level teaching skills was sufficient to make a difference for Māori students. But in fact, the data that we've got, and you'll see further examples of this from the 2 schools we're talking about, demonstrates quite clearly that it's those teachers, as the students know and told us, it's those teachers that got high levels of relationship skills and high teaching skills, those teachers in the Northeast, that's where Māori students really start making major progress in their learning outcomes. Thank you.
Kia ora, Russell. What always amazes me about this is when we, as part of the mahi, continue to interview students, whānau, teachers and leaders in schools, the continuation of this message coming directly from the students in their voice, and they just tell us again and again exactly what the ingredients are and the criteria are that they need from their teachers in their classrooms to be able to be successful.
Kia ora.
Rosina, I'd like to invite you now to talk for the next few slides about how you've managed to effectively implement Russell's research and theory into practice in your context at Hormai School, and the impact of this work in your context.
Yeah, kia ora, Jenna, and ngā mihi nui kia koe, Russell, for your kōrero. I want to touch on what you were saying about relationships being fundamental, and that has the biggest impact and influence on our Māori student improved outcomes. When we began the journey with relationship-based learning, which is now relationship first, these were some of the things that, as a cluster of principles from Manurewa, we wanted to know what was going to make the biggest difference in order for our Māori learners to achieve, because what we were doing at the time was showing no to very little impact. And we were coming from a place of, well, maybe we need to do a bit more kapahaka, a bit more, and those things weren't wrong, but we were just on the wrong, I guess, pathway for improved achievement to take place. So with the research, what we found from Russell Bishop's research when the students were interviewed. We were looking at this this bar graph here, what makes the biggest influence on student outcomes. Our students, 80% of Māori learners said it was our relationship with our teachers. On the other side, or by contrast, the teachers were saying, well, actually, it's up to, the students and their families. They need to be doing A, B, C for their achievement to take place. So what we did, or what I did as a school principal in Manurewa, is I wanted to see if these assumptions were true and correct. So we went about collecting voices from our very own students, teachers, our whānau. And we were just blown away that even after the Te Kotaitanga many years ago, we collected our first voices in 2016. The exact same percentage came out for our Māori learners. They were saying, and yes, they are primary school voices, but these are our Māori learners who said that the biggest influence on my learning is my relationship with my teacher. And our teachers, even teachers from my own kura, were, do I say the word blamed, or the deficit discourse was that it's up to parents, it's the whānau, they need to come to school on time. Everything was being pointed at our families. Now, we don't have, when students are in school, that's the time that we have with them in our school gates. So we had to look at what did we need to do to get that shift so that our teachers, could shift from that deficit outlook and be more agentic in their teaching learning practice. What made the biggest shift for us is the data and evidence. So as soon as we started implementing the tools that RF has, going in and having coaching conversation with our teachers, the evidence cannot lie. And it was in a way where our teachers felt empowered, not disempowered. They felt that they did have a voice and that they were able to change that sense of hopelessness or that sense of helplessness, because we as leaders were wanting to remove those barriers in order for our teachers to become the best teachers for all of our learners. So having the research of relationship first, culture counts, all the research that Russell has been part of, having those as a direction for us enabled us to collect our own data, start our own research, and begin our own theory into action, because it's not until we actually apply these things in practice that we start to see the shift. And then the biggest part for us was sustaining those effective practices. When we first started, so just before I finish, when we first started, our teachers, that quadrant that Russell just showed us, we were all sitting in that high relationship and low interactive or low pedagogical practice. To date, we are all now sustaining in the Northeast. We're teaching into the Northeast, and now it's about sustaining. And this is the impact at Homai, Weymouth, through the Manurewa cluster. As you can see there, our teachers' attitude changed. Why? Because we as leaders removed the barriers for teachers. Teachers remove their barriers for our learners. It's got to come from the top and filter all the way down. Systems, leadership, classrooms. So when we remove those barriers, and we're talking about that deficit discourse, our teachers feel more empowered to confront any issues and be more confident that our students need to be or need to have the best teachers in front of them. Kia ora, Jenna. Did you want me to also go over some of the deficit discourses that we hear a lot of in our staff rooms? Some of these, as you see in these bubbles here, some of you would have heard some of these discourses out in the playground, out in our own staff rooms. There's a lot of pressure from the top, for us coming down. They all want to get excellent, but they haven't quite got the background. So how do we change these into a more agentic discourse so that our learners can still get the best from us? And sometimes if we as the teacher don't have the answers, fantastic. Find the people who will. Find the leaders who can help you remove those barriers. So let's go for an example, this one, and I like this statement because me being senior management at the time in my school, there's a lot of pressure on us from senior management. How can we turn that around? Yes, there's a lot of pressure from senior management. As a classroom teacher, what can I do to support my senior management? What can we do together, maybe in collaborative, professional learning groups, to be able to unpack what are the pressures, where are these pressures coming from, and how can we support our leaders, teachers, and students so these pressures turn into more opportunities for us to grow? How do we turn that kōrero around? Well, how we do that is making sure that who is in the middle of that pressure and how do we alleviate that? As long as our students are getting the best out of us, high expectations, give them the effective feedback feed forward that is required for them to improve their practices. But most importantly, it's about us together doing the things together as a whole kura and not, going off in our own little tangents and building our own little powerhouses, so to speak. So just working on that collaborative practices. Gina, is anything else you want to add?
No, that's really great. Thanks, Rosina. It's nice to hear, stories of where it has happened, where it has been done. I know, Russell, your research has been out, in the sector for, 20, 30 years now, and yet we still come across adults in relationships with learners who unintentionally perhaps are still holding that deficit position or perspective. And it's really nice to be able to hear from you, Rosina, how you were able to change the culture of your school and support those people to reposition and thereby also improve their relationships and their teaching and the impact that they were able to have for those learners that we know they care so much about. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the Relationships First program and what it looks like for context if you want to engage with the PLD. So we've talked already about the research and then putting it into practice at my school. One of the key things that's really unique about Relationships First is the evidence-based tools that we have on offer that we can use to support these changes in school and support the implementation of the theory. So the tool that we use the most is the Relationships-Based Leaders of Learning profile. And this is essentially the success criteria for effective culturally responsive practice. And it tells us, comes from the research, from the student voices, and it tells us who we need to be and what we need to do for Māori learners and all learners to be the most successful that they can be. So the first part of the profile is about the building of the relationships, and Russell talked about this on the scatter plot slide earlier today. So the bottom axis is about the relationships, building the relationships, and the 5 deliberate actions that teachers and leaders can take to build the right kinds of relationships for Māori learners that then set the foundation for us being able to implement part 2, which are the 5 most impactful teaching practices, teaching strategies and principles that we can use to get the successful outcomes and improved outcomes that we're looking for. In part 3, Russell talked about monitoring in the Northeast in order to sustain, once we get there, to continue to monitor what we're doing in the other 2 parts of the profile and adapt them so that we can sustain this practice and maintain the implementation over time. We have 4 PO to the program, or 4 aspects that we focus on with schools that engage with us in Relationships First. So as well as having a deep understanding of the research and the profile and being able to implement these practices as teachers and leaders, we use voices from your context to be able to tailor the work and inform your journey using your own voices from your own context. And we've heard Rosina talk about the importance of the evidence and the data at Homai, and how they used that information to be able to support their journey. Impact coaching is the methodology that we use to support teachers to improve their practices in their place of practice. So we support you to train up impact coaches within your context, to build internal capability, and to use evidence-based tools to observe for those practices in classrooms, and support coach teachers to move closer to the northeast, move their practice up towards the northeast. And we know that it's not enough to just focus on what's happening at the classroom level. It takes all level of the system working together to improve, and the system must change in order to accommodate and implement the changes that we're asking from our teachers. So we have guiding coalition support within schools, so that leaders from all levels of your system can be involved in the monitoring and the sustainability of the mahi over time. We've got another example here that we'd like to share with you. So this work we've been implementing, as we said, in primary schools and secondary schools in New Zealand, and recently a project in Nayland College. And we're going to hear a video of Daniel speaking about the work and the impact of the work in his context. And this is some of the impact data here. And this is, direct evidence of the impact that this work can have for Māori learners in New Zealand contexts in current times.
So I'm Daniel Wilson. I'm the principal here at Nayland College. This is the end of my 4th year at the school. One of the things that I was really keen to do is rebuild those relationships. So even before the communities of learning, the kahuiako, had started, I spent a lot of time visiting the other contributing schools, working alongside the intermediate school principal to identify, I guess, where the transition challenges were across the organisations. When that evolved through to the community of learning, the fantastic thing for us as a school was suddenly we had a resource to be able to build our own sustainable facilitators within the school. So by working with Cognition, we've been able to, develop and train those facilitators to do an amazing job at supporting our staff in the classroom and improving achievement from the ground up with very key research-based strategies and a framework that the facilitators and the teachers get to know inside out, and really concentrate on the things that we know improve learning, as opposed to perhaps doing less of the things that we know are not having a great impact on learning.
I'm the cross-school lead teacher for our kahuiako. I've been an impact coach just this year. I've been learning how to be an impact coach, and it's made a huge impact on my teaching, and for us it's like a way in to actually make change with teacher practice in our col. So it's a huge, it's been a huge advantage for us to actually get to see teaching and talk to teachers about teaching.
It's been a real strength with what's been happening with this whole RBL, that there's just this culture within the school that's starting to develop where we're really talking about the learning, and we're really focusing on the learning and what's happening with the children and their understanding of what's going on.
Thanks very much for joining us on this webinar today. If you'd like to find out more about the Relationships First program, you can get in touch with Rosina and I. Our information is on the screen here, or you can go, as we've mentioned, to our Relationships First website at Cognition Education and see other case studies and get in touch with us via the website. Thank you very much for your time today, Rosina and Russell. Are there any final comments from either of you as we wrap up?
Kia ora. Yeah, I'd like to just close with, as schools, as a tumuaki, your leaders, if you are really serious about improved outcomes for Māori learners, this program is number one. And I say that because I've implemented it. It's been sustained in our school for over 6 years, and we have seen the improved outcomes from teachers, leaders, learners, and our whānau. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Oh, kia ora e korua. The final word I would like to say is I'd like to go back to the theme of the conference, which is equity and excellence in education. And I would like to suggest that what you're looking at here is an example of the promotion of excellence through an equity approach. By focusing on equity, by saying that we need to focus on those people who are the system is not supporting adequately, and just get away from blame, get away from problem approaches, and look to potentialities and look for solutions, and get support in the work that we are focusing upon, and we will see excellence for the students who are currently not being well served by the education system. They know the answers. They know how excellence can be promoted, and it's listening to them, and it's listening to the research that you've seen and the practices that you've seen that will bring about these wonderful outcomes that was so needed and so necessary for our tamariki and for our wider society. Kia ora no tātou.
Yeah.
Tēnā kōrua. Thanks very much. We love the work that we do in this space. We really hope that you found today useful and that you'll get in touch and we'll be able to hear from you soon. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.